Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the program. Don't forget to give us a rating. Now, I am a well-dressed beggar. I do have a collar on today, so I am not afraid to beg for ratings. So if you like what we're doing, please give us those 5 stars or the best you can. Now, for those who are returning, thank you very much for listening. Because of you and our great guests, just like the one we have today, the show is cracked the top 10% fastest growing podcasts in the world. And that's quite the accomplishment for you folks because there are over 1 million podcast opportunities out there in the marketplace today. A little bit of house cleaning to get out of the way. Don't forget to subscribe. If you do not like the platform you're on, don't worry. There's 23 different distribution points for the podcast online. You can also get it off the show's website, which is rexandrewshow.com. And I always recommend people go to this website because you get to learn a lot more about our guests. We have bios and links to their pages and their books and their programs and all the things they've done. We've had some really compelling, interesting people on the show, and that continues to go. We generally have about 30 in queue. So there's a large line of people that we have lined up, and it's all walks of life and interesting stories. So don't forget to subscribe, give us ratings, and remember that our show is all about people's stories, and that's what we do. And today, we're going to do what I talk about all the time. I have too many interests for just one lifetime, and around every corner, there's another discovery, so we've got a discovery for you today. Okay, so I want to introduce today's guest. Really excited to have him on the show. Again, people's stories are what it's all about. That's what the human experience is. So he's a father, okay? He's a retired teacher, and he's taught at multiple levels, both high school and also at college. So he's pretty versed in sharing ideas with people and education. He's got a daughter, and he's exciting to do something interesting. He is a serious athlete in the fact that he represents the Canadians as a triathlete for his age group. So pretty intense guy for that. And then also to a recent new author. So I'd like to welcome to the show today, Mark Ryall. Mark, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. And thank you for having me as your guest here.
It's great to have you. Now, I understand you're outside of Toronto, right?
Yeah, a little place west of Toronto called Hamilton, right at the edge of Lake Ontario.
That's right. They still play a little football over there, don't they? And hockey. So fantastic. Okay, so Mark, if you've listened to the show, which you mentioned you had, you know how we kind of play it here. First of all, we like to do hey, let's follow along. So I know you got a couple links or things you'd like to share where people can connect with you. So could you do that real quick before we start your story?
Sure. So I'm a first-time author, so I actually don't have an author website. I'll probably build one very soon. I should. But if people want to get to know me a little better, probably the best thing is just type in my name, Mark Ryall, MarkRyall, and Quora. And I have quite a presence on Quora, answering lots of questions across different topics. So you can really get to know me and my ideas there. The other thing, if you're interested in the book, just type in age decoded. It's age hyphen decoded, and it's available on most retailers.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Mark, how we like to play the show is we always want to kind of go back to the beginning and understand how people kind of comprise of what they are today. We are all an accumulation of the places we've been and experiences. So we like to go back and understand from the get-go. It's quite motivating. So I'd like to know, where were you born? And don't fret. I'll remind you all the questions it's a pretty long list here. So we want to know where you were born. You had siblings, what your family life was like, what interests you had growing up. So how'd you spend, if you had any spare time, what did you do with that? The types of jobs or careers your parents might have had, just because that influences things a lot, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes motivating. So take us back, William Mark. Where did this all begin? Where were you born?
Sure. I was born in Windsor, Ontario.
Okay.
The Detroit River separated Windsor from Motor City there. And I lived there for probably about, 10 years, and then moved on to some other parts of Ontario and then also across Canada. I've lived in a lot of different places, but definitely a Windsor boy.
Windsor boy. Okay, that's where you consider home. So do you have siblings?
I do. I'm sandwiched between two very domineering sisters. But they're lovely, and my older sister Karen and my younger sister Linda.
I'm guessing that they might just listen to this episode and you might get some blowback on that possibly, huh? Because I only have one domineering sister, and thank goodness. And so, and she, well, let's just put it this way. She's so good at it, I only need one. All righty, fantastic. So you're sandwiched in between the two. What types of work or careers did your parents have?
All right, my somewhat traditional, and my mother was more of a homemaker, although she did do part-time jobs while we were all growing up. And whereas my father was the major breadwinner, and back then that was more typical. He started off as a welder in Windsor, and he started his own welding shop. My grandfather was a welder and sheet metal guy, so sort of ran in the family. But then my dad got bought out by Canadian Oxygen, which is, I believe at that time was owned by British Oxygen, which is now Praxair. It's a huge corporation.
Huge corporation, yeah.
So he got bought out, and they asked him to get involved in management, and he did. And my dad's very good with people, so he worked his way up to become the I think director of marketing in Canada for Canadian Oxygen.
Wow. So tradesman morphed into executive. That's a great story. Fantastic. Okay. So what, as a kid growing up, what were the things that kept you busy when you weren't in school and didn't have homework?
Right. Well, I love staying active. I've lived pretty well any neighborhood I've lived in. For example, London, Ontario. I lived in London. We had so many kids on the block who loved to get involved with mud fights and to find bullfrogs in the local lagoon, and just riding around on our bikes and doing all sorts of mischievous things, but having fun, playing ball hockey. Ball hockey was I don't know, parts of the US they play a lot of hockey too, but in London hockey was huge.
Yeah.
And, we played endless ball hockey on the streets. So I was just like a regular boy running around doing lots of, yeah.
Well, I always ask about sports and things like that because we learn a lot from sports or activities. I had just recently on one of the world's foremost opera singers and the type of soprano she was. And it was pretty obvious to figure out she liked singing. She wasn't playing basketball or something to me, but we learn a lot from our endeavors there. So you grew up there playing normal kid stuff, doing hockey nut, that kind of things. And then tell us a little bit about your family life. Were you guys a close-knit family? How close are your sisters in age? Just a little bit about family dynamics, if you could.
Yeah, we're fairly closely knit family, although we're all independent in that sense. Me and my two sisters are very close in age. We're all about a year apart.
Okay.
And I'm fortunate that my parents have had a great marriage. They're still together, still alive after 65 years together and married.
Wow.
And
congratulations. That's great.
I'm appreciative of that. And
yes, what a golden era of when my parents were married. I think it was 57 years before my father passed away. So it's quite an example in your life when you have that kind of stability. That's fantastic. So how are you as a student? Were you a very studious kid? Were you skating by, or what did your academics look like as you were growing up?
I was always a very good student.
Okay.
I don't know. I was sometimes a little bit of a troublemaker, depending if I respect the teacher, but generally I was a good, usually, to be honest, top of the class.
Top of the class kind of guy. Okay, cool. So you got out of high school equivalency then, and what was your next step?
Coming out of high school, actually, I went into engineering at the University of Waterloo. My intention was to study civil engineering, and I was in there for about a year and a half. And actually, it was one of the toughest parts of my life because I withdrew from the program. I quit the program, and it was a very, very tough decision. And that was the first sort of marker I had where I realized that maybe maybe I wasn't going to be a scientist or an engineer. Maybe there's some other more subjective part of me that needed to express itself.
So was it out of boredom? Was it out of rigor? I mean, what was the pivot point that you said, okay, I've had enough of this civil engineering?
It was tough. I mean, I remember even meeting with the dean because I was actually the top student in that program, and he wanted to know why would you seem to be doing well here. Why would you want to leave our program? And I said, I'm interested in other things. I'd like to study psychology. I would like to study biomechanics, maybe some sociology. And then he was honest. He said, our program, engineering at Waterloo is a great program, world renowned, but he said, we don't have the flexibility for that sort of thing. So, a couple of days later, I actually withdrew.
Withdrew from there. Okay. So where did you pivot to as far as your studies? Was it that list, or did you pick another new major? What did you land?
I stayed in science, and I specialized in kinesiology. It was nice because I could study the biomechanics, and I also had a interest in sports at the time. I still do, but so it sort of dovetailed with both those.
Okay, fantastic. Is that what you finished your degree in then?
Yes, I finished that in science. Interesting though, I had another tough decision. A couple of years later, I got a scholarship to go west to Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. What a beautiful campus and place, a beautiful city. And I had the same tormenting situation where I thought, you know what, I don't think I belong here. The profs were great, the students were great. I had a really nice scholarship. And I remember writing a letter. I don't write letters or diaries, but I wrote a letter to myself. And I remember I looked at that letter just recently, and it said in it, I was almost like having this battle with myself. Like, are you going to stay in here? What are you going to do? Like, this is your life. Make a good decision. And I had already dropped out of the engineering program. And I thought, I don't want to drop out again. It's be so embarrassing, right? You're supposed to be a good student, Mark.
Yeah.
Saying stick with it. So I dropped out, of course. And what I did is that got me thinking more about teaching. And I never looked back after that. I think it was a good decision.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your first teaching job.
So my first teaching job was right after that. I wanted to stay in Vancouver. It's so beautiful there.
Yeah.
And I started teaching some labs. So I was teaching physiology labs just to sort of make ends meet and try to stay out there. Plus, I didn't want to go back to Toronto because I was so embarrassed about dropping out. Right? Anyway, so I stayed there, and one of my students said to me, he said, you're helping me with this course because you're good at explaining things. And it just sort of struck me, like I wasn't thinking of teaching at this point. I was just doing these labs. And then it was just a nice compliment, that one little thing. So I decided soon after that to apply to Teachers College. And that was my big pivot right there.
Okay. That was the big one. Okay. So did you first step into teaching high school, college, or what was your first time?
Yes. I taught for 1 year at University of Waterloo. I taught their biomechanics. I was their lab demonstrator. I did some lectures and whatnot. So I did take a bit of a hiatus and do a PhD in education, and I did an MBA too. So I should throw that in there. But I always came back to teaching, primarily at Royal St. George's College in Toronto, which is, it says college, but it's a high school. It's an academic high school.
Okay.
And most recently in Hamilton at Hillfield Strathallan College, which teaching economics, which is also a high school. Yes.
Fantastic. So what's been the most rewarding part of your teaching career?
I think teaching economics. When I started teaching high school, and it wasn't easy even starting high school. I had questions whether I'd be a good high school teacher. It probably took me, I'd say, 3 years to get used to it, get used to dealing with adolescents. You could be good at explaining things, but if you can't keep a class motivated, it doesn't matter, right? So it took me a while to learn that, how to learn from other good teachers and learn how to relate to adolescents better and get more confident in my own teaching. But I eventually did find I thought a nice groove there, and I was teaching mainly math when I started, but teaching economics, which I switched into when I went to the school in Hamilton, Hillfield, Strathallan. That was huge because it really opened up the more subjective stuff, less quantitative. People think economics is all math. It's not. It's politics, sociology,
yes,
business, technology, psychology. There's lots. It's all current events. It's in the arts faculty at a lot of universities. So it was a wonderful pivot for me to finish my last 10 years of teaching, doing just economics.
Just economics. It's funny. My degree is in urban and regional planning. I was a geography major. And geography is a lot like economics because we just study people and their environments and their environments contributing to what they did, and their cultures and stuff. So fascinating. And then I got into all the cartography and mapping and all that kind of stuff and laying things out. And guess what? I never used it. I went into technology sales immediately. And I can look at maps, and I remember a lot of those classes and labs. And I used to have a professor I used to harass all the time. It was a soils class, and I would come in, and he was disabled. He had a leg that had some issues, so he would come in a cane, and he was fairly slow. So I would always beat him to class, and he insisted that the class was, talked about soils. So I would come in every week or every day that we had class. I think it was 3 times a week. And I would write on the board, "Welcome to the dirt show." And so it used to rile him up. So I appreciate that, because I'm sure over your career, you had a few smart Alecks like me hanging around doing stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those are the ones you remember the most.
Yeah. So fantastic. So let's talk about the book you just recently put out. Tell me about that.
Sure. I first wrote it about 11 years ago when I started teaching economics, because that's when my mind really opened up and I felt sort of more like where I was at my genuine self, and I had more confidence expressing myself, maybe artistic, less objective, more subjective, and all that. So the genetic engineering and CRISPR and things like that were just sort of popping on the radar back then. And so I wrote the book. I actually wrote 2 books. That was the fiction. I wrote a nonfiction about running involving me and my daughter, because she's a competitive runner. And so we sort of trained and ran together. Neither book was published. I tried to get the fiction, the one that we're going to talk about more, the age decoded one, published back then. And I sent out letters to New York publishers and whatnot. But it was just an endless train of rejection letters. And I understand it's tough to crack into as a first-time author. And science fiction also is very, very competitive and very good market. So I sort of took it with a grain of salt, and I shelved the novel for a while and just kept enjoying my teaching. And then I retired recently, about a year and a half ago, and I think I was with the COVID and all that. My wife and I were in the house, and I'm probably a major nuisance to her by that point.
Sure.
And she, maybe it was a distraction technique, but she said to me, "Mark, what about that novel you were working on?" And I wasn't even sure if I still had the little drive that had it on it, like if it was still stored somewhere.
Right.
I did find it, and she said, "Dust it off, get working on it." And actually, I'm glad I did, because this topic is huge now. There's been so many developments in the last 10 years. And I'm not an absolute expert on it, but I have read a fair amount on it, and I do have a science degree. But I'm not someone who's actively researching that field. But so I was glad to dust off the book, update it, and prepare it again for publication. And the other thing, Rex, that happened is in the last 10 years, self-publishing has been much more of a viable option. In fact, some people even prefer to do it. Now, I'm not saying I prefer it. If there's a publisher out there who wants to pick this up, go ahead. But
sure. Well, there's positives and negatives of either approach. And I've looked at that in a lot of people. A big advantage of self-publishing is you have more control.
Yeah, exactly.
A downside of self-publishing, you don't have a marketing machine behind you. So yeah, there's ups and downs to both. That's for sure.
So I about 6 months ago, I did dust it off, and I I added about, I would say 80 pages to it, a lot of that more recent information. The thing with science fiction, this is hard science fiction, so it's not some remote planet with really pie in the sky stuff. It's more like, this is where I think we're going to be in 50 years to 100 years.
Okay.
So I tried to catch up on the current science and then sort of bring it forward through the years 2020 to 2060. And then another 200, you'd have to read the novel, it goes another 200 years beyond that. That process was another 80 pages. And then I was lucky enough to know someone who's a real science fiction buff in Toronto who volunteered to review it for me, like not do a critical review. And his input was great. I mean, he tore it to shreds. But and I said, okay, well, and I read through his report, and I thought, yeah, you're right. This character, we don't need him or her, or this didn't make sense, this chapter, and you're right. I could add in several chapters, maybe some flashbacks so the plot isn't just linear, And he had all sorts of good feedback, and I followed probably about 80% of it. I didn't agree with it all, and it was most helpful. And then I had a couple of people here helping me too, with including my daughter and my wife were editors, but a couple other people in the artistic community here who looked at the characters and the dialogue and made lots of great suggestions. So, in that 6 months, it came together, and I just self-published it 3 weeks ago.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations. Well, and the thing that's nice about self-publishing these days is the ability to get it into retail so much easier than it used to be. So, sticking it up on Amazon and all the places there, it's not a horribly difficult process. And so I love it. I think it's great because it opens up the doors for so many people to be able to get content out, because, who knows what is on the mind of a manuscript reviewer that day at some big publishing house, whether they had a good day, bad day, or they had a bad lunch and they weren't feeling good, or you never know, So I just think it's a great thing. So give us the sort of without giving away the secret sauce, because we want everybody to get your book and read through it and understand what's the basis of your fiction here.
Sure. Well, you have to just step back and think, what's the basis of genetic engineering? So
yes.
Answer that question first. It's really, if you think of through the history of humankind, we have focused on nurture, not nature. So we've nurtured each other. We've improved education, medicine, ecology, counseling, teaching, diet.
Yeah, food's been huge. I mean, if you even just look at what they've done with wheat, over the last century.
So we've, our focus has been helping each other out and moving on an upward progression through more than nurture. Now, there's the nature and the nurture. Everybody's heard of that, right? But now with genetic engineering, it's all bets are off. So we're going to be changing our very nature, human nature itself. It will be changed. Wow. So in the book, what I thought, my goal in the book is just to educate people and give them a feel for this. So I thought, okay, I'm going to pick a couple of things on the human nature front. I'll pick psychological and one that's physical, because anything is fair game now once they can change your.
Sure.
Okay. So for the physical, I picked aging. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but I'm a baby boomer, but it is a physical thing. Some people see it as a disorder, but that's a debate. But it is a physical thing that happens to humans. We all age and we die.
Yeah.
So I thought in this book, based on the research I've read, that it would be a really good physical thing to put in there. Just literally stopping aging and actually reversing it too. And there's lots of research going on this right now, and we can talk about that a little if you want. But there are very good researchers out there right now, in Japan, United States, in Europe, who are basically already looking at stopping and have reversed
Aging.
using genetic engineering.
Wow. Well, an area that I love to talk about because I have intimate connections to it is human brain chemistry and brain health. And when I don't wear this on my sleeve, but I don't hide from it. I was diagnosed about 20 years ago as a bipolar 2 hypomania ADD. And at that time, they just threw meds at it and said, well, this is what it is. And well, the DSM has changed a lot. So now my diagnosis is completely different. It's a high bipolar 2 undefined, which means they really can't figure out what the heck's going on with me. But the truth of the matter is, we've learned a lot in the last 20 years of simple things like, you can actually rewire your brain synapses and things. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done that were just assumptions in the past, which, as you look back on it now, it's like, well, that's kind of silly.
Yeah. Both those things you mentioned, the bipolar and the ADD, have genetic basis to them. So
Absolutely.
they're fair game.
Oh, absolutely.
I think a lot of people would not argue with trying to tinker with people's genes to try to solve such problems.
Absolutely. I know my father was never tested. He's been gone about 7 years. But based on what I know from the research I've done and, educating myself about my brain chemistry and that type of stuff, absolutely he was. Absolutely he was some form of bipolar. And then based on the stories of my grandfather who passed away when I was 9, I only met him maybe 3 times. Absolutely he was. And so there absolutely is genetic markers. And I look at my family, I've got 5 kids. People look over my shoulder here, got the wall of fame up there. My big concern in my lifetime is, what do I do to help my kids? Because I know I pass those genes on, right? I mean, what can I do to help them? So you're absolutely right. It's completely fair game. Okay.
So that the first thing I mentioned, Rex, is the aging, which has mental effects too, right? As people age, it's not necessarily a bowl of cherries, right?
Yeah.
And my parents are quite old right now and struggling with their health. So I'm seeing all that firsthand right now. But also in the book, I thought, let's put in a psychological variable. And so the aging variable was seen as something that, I think a lot of people would go for that, although that's a huge debate. Should we really be immortal? And actually in the book, it turns out to be not so nice a thing for some of the characters, for various reasons. But anyway, it's something that I think if you look at the number of people taking the COVID vaccine right now, maybe 60, 70% will take it. I think more take the immortality procedure if it was cheap, if it was offered by the government.
Right. I would have to agree with that. I really struggle right now, and I'm not an anti-pharmacology person. I mean, I believe that there are a lot of blessings in our world today because of, the whole pharmacological sciences. However, I'm a little reluctant to take something that was jammed through the system in 9 months, and, what are the long-term genetic impacts of this? I mean, if someone were to sit down and do research, if they look at the list of drugs that have been pulled off the market in the last decade with 4 to 5 times as much clinicals on it. Yeah. I just think there's a lot of interesting outcomes there. And what do we know? I mean, they're starting to look at, for heaven's sakes, at some of the vaccines that they have, that they're going to only give you 6 months and you've got to reboost every 6 months. Well, what is that going to do to my body?
Yeah. So there's all sorts of unknowns, and there always will be when humankind does these things. Now, just to go back, because we both digressed, and I'm sorry, it's more my fault.
No. It's like, I go off on tangents too. That's okay.
It's but the psychological variable. I thought for a book, I need something that has a plot, like almost like a corruption side to it, so to really drive the reader crazy and to really show that there can be some negatives here too. So what I did in the book, and I don't want to give too much away, but while people go in for this procedure to become immortal, the government finds it quite convenient to also tinker with one other proteome or set of genes, which basically disables what I call the propensity to dissent.
Oh, okay.
So now the researchers on it weren't quite sure, because with any traits, there's overlapping genes and characteristics and nothing's exact, but
Right.
they do think they've pretty much clipped the propensity to dissent without these people knowing it.
Oh my goodness. That's scary science.
Yeah, and when I told that, there's a book that just came out called Editing Humankind, I believe it's called, by Ken Davies. And the reviewer for that book from the Washington Post, I was talking to him on the phone a couple of days ago, and I told him about my book, and he said, I wonder if there's some countries thinking about doing this.
Oh yeah. It's if you look back over time, and we don't really ever talk politics on the show. It's all about human condition. But you look back over time of tyrannical rulers in the Russian, if you look at the Marxist and you look at China and you look at regimes around the world, there's, in the last 150 years, there's been 150, 180 million people killed.
Yes.
By these tyrannical governments. And so, you look at what's happening today in modern day China with your social scores, where they're monitoring everything. The absolute perfection of facial recognition has taken place in China. So they can pick you out of a crowd of where everybody looks fairly similar with hair color and eye color. There's some scary consequences, and I would never put it past. I'm not a doomsday person. I'm not somebody who looks at the world as a conspiracy, but the evil side of the human nature, I wouldn't put anything past that. I just wouldn't, You look at the...
Rex, I threw my glasses on because I would like to give you a quote from my book.
Yes, let's do that. I want to hear this.
So this quote is from someone who's working in the government, but he's just had enough and he has to get out. And so his name is Ahmed, and he says to someone else he's talking to, he says, all age-decoded humans have been set, without knowing, to a very minimal level of potential dissent. That is, to high compliance with the rules of authority, rendered sycophants. In many societies and political systems, this can happen using such means as dictatorship, propaganda, materialism, magic, or religion. But in this case, it happened through genetic engineering.
The implications of that are so big. It gets you over to Glenn Beck. He talks about these things all the time, but I really think that there's a lot of good that comes from science in our world, and some of the things that we fix genetically, there. But this type of stuff, and again, this is real. I mean, we're not talking out there craziness. This is not, there are people in the world working on this right now.
Another way you might want to, and listeners might want to think about this, is we've had several sort of micro revolutions. I go back to the atom, which is the pretty fundamental structure, and it was talked about by the Greeks, and then most recently we've used it in many good ways. Like in Ontario here, we have nuclear power, we are one of the premier jurisdictions for using nuclear power. We're totally green. Almost 70% of our energy comes from nuclear, and then most of the rest from hydroelectric. So we're very green compared to most areas. So nuclear has great potential.
Great potential.
But we all know that nuclear has also caused lots of problems for the world. And right from I think it was the 1968 Treaty on the Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which was signed by almost 200 countries, but it wasn't signed by India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea.
Yeah.
And there was even a treaty that was passed, I think, just a couple months ago, called the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So, and it basically proposes getting rid of nuclear weapons, but of course, it was not signed by any of the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons.
Yeah. No.
On the atomic front, we've already been dealing with this for almost this like 2/3 of a century, I guess. And then if you go to the next revolution, the micro revolution, which is the bit and the internet and computers,
Yep.
we haven't had that sort of that scare, that that doomsday-ish, nuclear mass type scare. But there are issues with cyber warfare, and I believe in the U.S. government around 10 years ago set up its U.S. Cyber Command for that reason. It's not a totally safe world out there. The more you connect,
No. Well, and you look at the recent developments over the last 15 years with blockchain and artificial intelligence. That's some scary science at the same time. Used for the right reasons, awesome.
right?
Get in the hands of people who want control and power and the evil side of the human nature. Scary technologies.
So I'm hoping with my book, Rex, to just make people more aware, educate them. So because there's a lot coming out right now. There's a lot of nonfiction being written on this right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you one example. There's a researcher here in Canada, and Françoise Baylis, and she just two weeks ago, I think, published in the Harvard University Press a book called Altered Inheritance. And she talks about how important it is for everyone to learn about this, to know about it, and everyone to participate in it, to so that we have a sort of a social consensus on this, because it's going to happen. It's a tsunami about to hit us, and we need to control and keep it as positive as possible.
Yeah.
I could mention one other researcher at UCLA.
Yeah, please do.
Jody Halpern, who is part of a committee there which looks into the ethical implications and issues around genetic engineering. So that's absolutely fantastic that those two women are they're scientists, they're right in the field, are right now speaking out about the importance of this.
Well, like I said, I hadn't said, I have been in technology my entire career as a professional. So right out of college, my second job was in technology, never left it, 35 years plus in technology. And I helped very large companies adapt and deploy technology systems to make things better. But at the end of the day, it was always about change management, okay? So I used to say to people all the time that technology for the sake of technology is stupid. I mean, it doesn't get us anywhere. But if you manage it correctly and you apply it correctly, it becomes a very powerful tool. And I see the same thing when we're talking about the science fiction of genetic engineering, and the realities of those things are, yeah, if it's just out there and applied right, man, it's powerful and good stuff. If it's for the wrong uses, man, that's scary. It really is.
I could give you one example of this movement to try to control this in a positive way, because if you go back a couple of years, He Jinggui from China crossed the line and did something that most scientists were quite abhorred by. And what he did, he was a good researcher, but he crossed the line. He did some gene editing of embryos so what that means is that like so far people are very, very careful about trying not to do gene editing with germline cells. Germline cells are cells that if you edit them, it's a little like Jurassic Park. If you edit them, they get into the gene pool, and they're heritable. They're inherited by the offspring of whoever gets that. And that gets scary, because if there's any unintended side effects or whatever, it's now in the human gene pool. And that's what He Jinggui did. So he's now in jail. He's been jailed the Chinese jailed him for, I think, 3 years, and they also financially punished him. And in the rest of the world, we've set up. I don't think it's a coincidence. In 2018, right around when that happened, there was a commission that was set up by the National Science science academies of
Mhm.
various. The US took a lead in this. And it has a long name, but I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's something like the Commission on the Clinical Use of the Human Germline Genome Editing.
Hmm.
I didn't get that quite right, but they met and they were very concerned about exactly what happened there with tinkering with germline cells. The tinkering, I think what's going to happen first, though, and it's much more accepted, is they are going to change, they're going to tinker with change people's DNA of what are called somatic cells. So that would be, for example, let's say you had Alzheimer's and they had a way of curing that, or blindness, or your eyes were sort of going, or maybe schizophrenia
Diabetes or mental health orders.
that could come on while you're living as an adult. So you're not an embryo here. You're not a sperm or an egg or an embryo. You're
Right,
sort of
right.
living, not necessarily an adult, but you're out of the womb and you're living. That sort of tinkering, that's called somatic cell tinkering. That actually isn't as dangerous at all because it's not inherited by anything beyond that one person. So you
Right.
can person and it's it's not heritable. So that's probably where it's going to start. The tsunami.
Almost a little bit of, I guess, an angle of corrective type medicine for those types of ailments, right?
Right.
But when you start to get into the engineering side of things with embryos, boy, that's scary to me. I don't like to use the word playing God, but you start tinkering with those types of things, it could have some serious implications.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of positive here. I don't want to be so totally doomsdayish.
No.
Things, even that Chinese scientist, he was trying to prevent HIV, and there's so many conditions. There's like I've read that there's something like 6,000 or more genes that are involved with human disorder, and whatever disorders could be mental or physical. Just another example is cystic fibrosis. Apparently, it might be one of those that is fairly easy to solve. It literally is. Okay, I'm not going to be exact on this, but apparently it's very much caused by one little switch between the C and the G nucleotides, one of those base pairs in one gene. So, and I was just reading recently that they have the technology to switch those base pairs now. So if they could do it, that would be wonderful. I mean, I know people who've had cystic fibrosis, the horrible. My sister went out with a fellow who died eventually because they usually don't live super long. People with cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
And I was just reading the stuff was just coming out every day. They have just it was just announced it was associated with MIT. It's called the Whitehead Institute. There's 19 scientists there, and Jonathan Weissman just released a study. I was just reading about it 2 days ago, where they think now they can turn genes on and off without even using CRISPR to edit them. So in other words, you can take a gene, test it out, turn it on, turn it off, reverse that procedure, and see if it works. If it doesn't work, it'd be great for experimentation, but also for not having these unintended side effects that CRISPR might have. So that's fascinating if they can do that sort of stuff. And then you can try cystic fibrosis, try HIV. There's so many conditions that are involved with genetics that they could at least experiment on, and then maybe get more confident with applying to humans.
Well, it seems that the physical probably has far more upside. I don't know. I'm just my mind is rolling here. That the physical would have more upside or would perceive than behavioral type modifications, like the dissidence or, personality traits or those types of things that we know are genetically passed along. But, hey, if we could fix cystic fibrosis or onset diabetes or, there's tons and tons of things. It would seem like the upside would be extremely important. When you mentioned that making people immortal, well, there's some jerks in my life I would never want to be immortal, right? You know,
Or if they are, I don't want to be.
yeah, I don't want. They don't want me around for all that much time. Holy cow! Get rid of this character. So yeah, I think the world is paved with good intentions, and in science, we're always trying to do things, you know, with good intentions and stuff. But it's always the bugaboo is that unintended consequences, you know, side effects and things that can really make things go awry.
Right. CRISPR is getting a lot better. The Jennifer Doudna and her co-collaborator, who also won the Nobel in 2020 for chemistry, that's Emmanuel. I'm going to butcher her last name, but it's Charpentier. Okay. Anyway, Emmanuel, her partner, they made great strides in making CRISPR more effective and less side effects, more efficient, and it's just going to continue. They're going to get better and better at it rapidly.
Wow, that's incredible. So for a lay person who isn't as in deep into this but would like to get deeper into it, are there some good resources that people could put on their radar to say, hey, I should be following stuff at MIT or these particular organizations? Would there be some good resources you might be able to throw out for us?
Actually, there's a good book first I'd recommend, and that's the one by Walter Isaacson, which is it's a bestseller.
Okay.
It's called The Code Breaker, and he talks about the CRISPR technology. And Jennifer Doudna and her partner, their hard work. He got access to all their hard work before it happened, so it's quite a nice inside story on.
Yeah.
There's the commission that I mentioned before, the one with the long name to it. It's the Commission on the Clinical Use of Human Germline Genome Editing, but there are a number of other commissions out there. There's a group that was run. It's called the Helsinki Declaration. I think it was done in the 1960s. Actually, they were thinking way ahead of things. Where they were worried about this stuff too. That's a group of World Medical Association people. There was a summit in Washington 5 years ago. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's the summit on genome editing, I believe. And they had world experts there talking about the need to control this and keep it efficient but safe. I mentioned the Jody Halpern at UCLA. You could look her up and check her committee. I mentioned François Baylis from Canada. Her book, Altered Inheritance. The UNESCO has a group that's sort of on this, and the World Health Organization has. But you know, the thing is, none of these organizations can really force anybody, no matter how many declarations they make or decrees or publications or reviews or updates. They can't force everyone to do it. I can give you an example. Athletes aren't supposed to take steroids, right?
Right. Yeah.
But you know, it hasn't been easy stopping them and controlling.
No. I mean, we have that every Olympics. Somebody gets. I mean, it's every Olympics. It's not just, you know, weightlifters and stuff. It's the performance enhancing, you know, all the time. So here's, I think, an angle I'd like to just explore with you for a couple minutes here. You know, something has been brought to light a lot recently, especially in the Western world, and that is the censorship that's been taking place in social media. Okay. So somewhere along the line, these leaders of these social media companies have determined that they're the bearer of truth. They're the standard of truth. And in fact, I was going to record a rant today because our wonderful governor here in Colorado was chirping on social media. I don't follow his ideologies very much, but I follow his page because I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Well, anyway, he was chirping about the fact that in Colorado, out of the 6.7 million people, that 2 million people have been vaccinated. So all I typed on his timeline was, is this 2 million lab rats? Question mark. And guess who got put in Facebook jail for 24 hours? And I didn't debate anybody. I didn't attack anybody. I just had a question. Is this 2 million lab rats? Question mark. Well, so me being the argumentative type, and I want to prove that, hey, I'm being wounded here. I basically contested their blockage on Facebook. And believe it or not, they came back and said, yeah, you didn't break the community rules, because that was their excuse, community rules. Okay. So that's, now I'm not going to tell you how many times I've been suspended on social media, but it has been a few. I get it. My alligator mouth gets me in a place my chicken arms may not back up all the time. But my point in coming back to this is, with the modification of genome science, and you look at the things that they can be doing, who is the standard bearer of moral truth out there? Okay. Because it's kind of scary right now. I think they're saying now like 75, 80% of people's news and socialization is done on these platforms. You know, the Twitter, the social, Instagram, the Facebook, YouTube. Well, who is the person that holds the moral stick? You know, because if you can fix, I would think most everybody would agree or could agree that physical attributes, fixing things, you know, solving health issues is great. But then who is the moral stick that says, well, you can't use this for being a triathlete, or you can't use it for a weightlifter or whatever? Then you get into the politics of all the gender swapping around stuff. I mean, who's doing what with that? Okay. Then you get into, well, who is, you know, we've seen it a lot. I follow a lot of political stuff just because I have to stay current trends, is, well, who really has, you know, that moral stick? And I don't know who we should be trusting, because I don't think either sides of liberal or conservative thinking right now are being very common sense oriented in this.
It's interesting. One of my core answers deals a little bit about that. And, you know, it was right after Parlay was sort of shut down.
Yep.
Unceremoniously, probably without major justification. In there, I predicted two things are going to happen this year. Number one, Canadian team is going to win the Stanley Cup for the first time in, I don't know, I think it was 1993.
Okay.
Should not happen. We should have a few more under our belt. And the second thing is, someone's going to start a new vertically integrated media company.
Yeah. I think you have a couple. Yep. I think you have a couple of them out there under cooking. Ben Shapiro, you know, the guy based here down in Florida now, his Daily Wire is pretty up and down. They're even starting to put out movies, so they're becoming vertically integrated. And again, I don't pay much as on the left and liberal, because I was raised a farm kid in Colorado. And then the other one that's close, but he's not vertically integrated completely, is Glenn Beck, The Blaze. That one, he has lots of stuff, and he's compiling different authors and speakers and podcasters and people like that. But I do think you're right. I think it's going to happen. I just don't see how we're going to continue. And one could probably even argue that maybe CNN and MSNBC could closely be headed that way direction too, but they haven't stepped into movies or heavily into podcasts and things like that. But I think you're going to see it, because I think there's just too much friction that's created right now. Right. But it just goes back to who is going to be the person who makes the moral decision of where is the line of good and bad, you know?
Right. I think the more democratized things are, the better. Like shows like yours and others help. Every little bit helps on that front. So,
well, the great thing I think it's good about our world right now, even though we have this massive division on thoughts and ideologies and stuff, the barriers of entry have been virtually removed. You know, a guy can have a computer, $150 mic, the ability to upload to YouTube and subscribe to put his podcast out on a platform, and wow, instantly. You know, I brought my show. I used to be on a radio show back in Denver a long, long time ago. Set it aside to raise my kids, be dad, coach, and stuff, knowing that I'd probably come back. Well, okay, I came back in January 1st of 2021, and I've already recorded 100 and some, podcasts. And so you're right. The democratization of information is great because I think it allows people to get around those big control houses. I mean, that's how I look at them. It's control houses. And, if you look back at human history, there's just too many examples in human history where good intentions started off and evil was the result. You look back to, all the dictators and the people who, the easy one everybody throws out is Hitler and his regime, and Mao and Pao over in Cambodia. I mean, there's just too many examples where this type of technology, and we've tried to restrict weapons, nuclear weapons, to the 9 countries because we don't want these things to happen. But this is even worse. I mean, it's way worse. It's not just physical destruction.
Right.
Crazy stuff. Well, I'm glad you took the time to write this. Now, tell me a little bit about your triathlete. I mean, you're not just the crazy mad scientist here. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty much.
I always love running, and my daughter's a runner too. So I coached her. She actually got me into running, which is strange. I didn't say, you should be running. No, she said when she was 10 years old, I want to run, and I couldn't let her go out necessarily running around on her own. I sort of followed her. When I started with her, that was an easy run for me and a tough run for her. But within a few years, it was a tough run for me and an easy run for her because she got quite fast, and she loves it. She still runs. She's 23 years old, and I kept running, and I was coaching. One thing I really love about high school too is I big time cross country coach. I loved cross country. It just makes people stronger, better. Yeah. Great team sport. It's not just so that sort of, I was running and I was coaching running, but then one of my buddies at school said, why don't you try a triathlon? And I said, have you seen me swim? I can't do it. But so I tried to learn how to swim, and I got to the point where I could at least finish the swim without drowning to death. And the biking came a little more naturally. So I was able to bike, swim, and run, and that's what a triathlon is. And I really enjoyed the variety of it, and the training was also easier on my body because running is just pounding, one-dimensional, and whereas the swimming was great. And suddenly I'm floating. It was just beautiful, even though I was slowly floating. And
and to be able to swim in open water is a lot different than
it's awesome. Yeah, it's great. And the biking too, you feel like you're floating. This is all compared to running. There's no pounding. You could bike for 3 hours and you're not really stiff afterwards. Nope. It's a wonderful exercise. So I got into that with my buddy, and he was a serious triathlon. So I sort of learned from him, and we both ended up going to Switzerland for we had to qualify as Canadians, age group Canadians. And so in my age group, which at that point was the 60 to 65, I just turned 60. I qualified, and now that means I'm only competing against those gentlemen in that age group. They're all maniacs. I learned that. And,
that's great.
We had a great time. It was a wonderful experience. So that's how I got into triathloning.
So what's next on the horizon? You've got this book out. Are you flexing your muscles, working on another, or what do you think's next?
I think I would like to try another novel. This has been a wonderful experience. I mean, I just, I have a couple more podcasts lined up this week, and I've even enjoyed just this experience. This is my first podcast ever. It's been great. So thanks, Rex. And I think I'm already, the wheels are spinning. I think I've got another book in mind where I'm thinking that, well, everybody's writing about robots becoming more human. I think maybe I could take the Turing test and all that, right? Yeah. I think let's go from the other direction, humans becoming more like robots, and we need a test for that.
Well, I'm not telling you what to write, but I think if you address that whole angle of who is the standard bearer of truth.
Yes.
That's a huge, I mean, who do we argue is going to be that? I sure hope it's not Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey.
Well, in my current novel, Age Decoded, that does come up because we are going 200 years in the future. So at that point, they don't have smartphones; they have neuro-integrated
Yeah.
transmitters.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of just do everything you could on your smartphone, but you don't have to touch any buttons.
Yeah.
And even talking to people, you don't need to. Some people still talk naturally back then. It's called talking naturally using your mouth and your vocal cords, but a lot of people just use their NITs, the neural integrated transmitters.
Yep.
But there is some worry that the government can tap in on not just those conversations, but
To control it.
talking to yourself,
Yeah.
which would be most horrifying.
Oh my, that would be horrible. That would be horrible. Crazy.
Maybe I should make that my next novel.
That might be right there, my friend. We might have just dug up a great chapter or two.
Sorry to spook you even more, Rex.
Well, I think it's been interesting to me, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I tend to be an observer. I like to watch trends and people and things, stand off from a distance and look at it just a little different. And I think that's what's been interesting. One aspect of COVID, I'll get on a soapbox here for just a second, but it fits in what you're talking about, the dissidents, is people who have embraced, I guess it's the right word, the shutdowns and the restrictions and the mandates around COVID. Nobody really knows what the real data is. I mean, because one side says this, one side says that, somebody's down the middle, there are these things. But it's been interesting, people watching experience, to see how different people have adapted these things or embraced them. Some people, here in the United States, go to hell. We don't like to tell anybody to tell us what to do. That started, 250 years ago with the British, right? Don't tell us what to do. But then you have a lot of people who have embraced it and accepted it. And I think what's been an interesting observation, and you can tell me I'm crazy.
In a tough time. I mean, in Hamilton, I was just driving my car and I saw a lady on the sidewalk on one of those medical scooters because she couldn't walk, and she looked like she's probably 75 years old, and she had some shopping bags clipped onto the back of the cart, and
Yep.
was carefully driving along, and she had her mask on, and just felt so badly for her, and she was everything she could to stay healthy,
Well, let me throw something out from a look into the future. Okay, so we in North America have gone from an agrarian societies where most everybody lived on farms and those types of places, and we've migrated to the cities. Okay, most everybody, again, this is my observation, and laugh at me if you want. Most of our population now is metropolitan. Okay, most of our population lives in a bubble as far as safety. Okay, so we kind of have this safety first world. Well, we don't really do things to cause risks. Most of us are not working with heavy machinery or a chainsaw or something like that we can get hurt. Okay, so during COVID, all of a sudden, a very, very large percentage of the population was facing possible death for the first time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so now they're woken up to this. And so tying this back in, and not just Rex's nonsense and stuff, is if you can mess with people's genes from a level of restricting or increasing decreasing their dissidence, you could take these types of fears where I'm now afraid that I might get a virus and die, and accelerate their acceptance of those things.
Yeah.
That to me is holy cow scary, because
Bill Gates has talked about this. He thinks, going back, Warren Buffett thinks that nuclear is the number one issue, almost intractable. But Bill Gates thinks bioterrorism is the number one issue, intractable. And he's worried about, he actually said a few years ago, he said there will be some sort of a pandemic, which has happened. And he said, but the risk of a bioterrorism type thing where they take, say, a COVID virus and then genetically manipulate and make it, 100 times more deadly and 100 times more contagious. He said that risk is much higher than the natural risk of a virus. So we had the natural risk.
Well, and there would be people who would say in this current pandemic, that's what happened.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's good because it's woken everybody up to the,
I think so.
One little biochemical entity. I don't even think they call it life, a virus, can just turn the world upside down. One little thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for coming on. It's been great, Mark.
No problem. It's been
Enjoyed it.
fantastic experience. My first.
Well, I'm glad. I'm going to have you back, and I'm going to hunt you down on your next book, because I got to follow someone who's thinking out there a little beyond just their next dinner plate. So anyway, the last question I ask all my guests, and you may know this is coming or not, you know, in our modern cultures, and, you know, we have these things we call bucket lists. And in fact, I've met the bucket list guy. I interviewed him. His name is Trav Bell. He's down in Australia. Great guy, great episode to listen to. But we all have these things we want to do before we die. And then, but in the universe, being a scientist, you know, there's an opposite of everything. So there's an opposite list. It rhymes with bucket, starts with an F, but I'm not going to say that. Okay. So it's a list that basically you're going to say, no way, I'm not doing it. So while you're thinking about something on a bucket list, now everybody that's heard my show knows I'm not eating sardines. All right. I've tried those once. That's on that list. Okay. Okay. I'm not going back to Mexico City anytime soon. I was down there on a business trip about 20 years ago, had automatic rifles stuck in my ribs waiting to get into a building. No, there's no reason to go back to a place like that. So what might be on Mark's F-it list? Something, and it could be something as silly as sardines, or something as big as saying I'm not doing X, Y, or Z.
Well, I think when we all get over this COVID, everyone's going to want to have these haircuts and manicures and tattoos and whatnot. I am never going to get a pedicure. All right. I don't want anybody touching my toes. You couldn't pay me to go through with that. Is that okay, Rex? Or
that's a great one.
Tattoo? I'm not a big one.
No, that's a great one. That's probably one more unique we've had. I had one with an opera singer, Holly. Oh my goodness. Listen to that episode. I'm not even going to tell people what she said. That was just, I was taken back. So anyway, well, thank you for coming on. I'm going to follow your works. I hope everybody gets a chance to re-listen to this. We're going to update the website just and make sure that all your information's out there so people can get in contact with you. I think you're on to some very interesting stuff, and that's what makes our show.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rex. I appreciate you having me as a guest.
Okay. Well, until next time, folks, we'll call this one a wrap for this episode. Don't forget to stop by the show website, rexandrewshow.com, to get all the information about our guests. Love these great stories. And until next time, 3 things we always say: be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.